Welcome to season 2 of UnHypnotized with your host, True Heather. This season, we are here to tackle a theme, which is Bitcoin dating in a fiat world. Now, this topic is on the top of mind of a lot of Bitcoiners. And just like season 1, I'm here with Dave Bradley for episode 1 to get into the series and talk more about Bitcoin dating. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to have you back. Let's go, season 2. So, we know this is a topic that has become more and more relevant in the Bitcoin space. And I know on your show, the Bitcoin Hour, you did do an episode about Bitcoin dating and how, was it, no, it wasn't Bitcoin dating. It was how Bitcoin fixes dating. Can you get a little bit more into that for our audience?
Yeah, this one came up. We did a conference a few months ago called Sovereign Minds, where I did the Bitcoin Fixes Everything live and just answered everybody's questions about the problems in the world. And that one came up. I suspect you might have even put that one in there.
I
But
did.
but yeah, dating is a big problem in the world right now, and a lot of people are struggling with it. And just like almost every other really bad systemic problem in the world, if you kind of dig down to the roots of the problem, a lot of the problems that we experience in the world are really just caused by misaligned incentives. And those incentives are misaligned because the people who get to spend the money, those who print the money, are not the same as the people who earn the money. And so those who spend the money without earning it inevitably spend it in ways that are bad for everyone else. And so dating, is a pretty broad topic. So you can kind of look at it in a bunch of different ways in terms of how sort of the fiat system and the fiat world has twisted that, right? But I think it's useful to kind of start with what's actually wrong with dating in the world right now. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's wrong with dating. I think first and foremost, it's kind of comes down to this cultural issue of time preference. And you have these dating apps that, just like every other dopamine producing app in the world that will send you your Uber Eats or your next date, it becomes very sort of easy and disposable, right?
Mhm.
It's there's a million options on those apps, and it encourages people to take a much more short-term view of things. And so I think fundamentally that's one of the biggest issues with dating right now, is that our entire society is conditioned into this very short-term thinking, go get the next satisfaction, instant gratification. And the hope is that a move to a Bitcoin standard, a move to a world where you get to keep the value of the money that you earn, will lead to more direct incentives that will inevitably lead to longer term thinking on just about everything, including dating.
Yeah, and I think then there would be less of a need for that dopamine fix to kind of numb out what's really going on, or what's not being fulfilled by a lower time preference, especially in relationships and dating. I know it's so easy. Someone said to me, I loved during COVID because I could just like DoorDash sex. I was like, what what have we come to? But like you said, like dating apps really have created low time preference, and therefore uh, affected the value of our connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that's been twisted is the actual goal, right? There's a bunch of different reasons why people would be dating. There are people who are just following that high time preference and saying, we're going to just chase whatever you want in the moment. And, that's their choices. But I think there is this, most of human history has been defined by the family unit. And the family has been largely attacked by Fiat culture as well. And I think all funded by money printing, the role of feminism in attacking and destroying the family, and really, took what looks like a good cause. There were problems with gender rights and women's rights that women were not really being respected at different times in the past. But I think the swing has gone way too far in the other direction, basically, and they've used this guise of feminism to trick men and women into thinking that it would be desirable to have a two-income family. And so, you go back 60, 70 years, and it was very common for one person to support a family of 5 or 6 people on a single income, usually the man in the family, but functionally it could have been the woman at that point. And now they've moved it to the point where people are getting into relationships more for the financial viability. It's hard to afford a place to live if you don't have 2 incomes these days, let alone raise a family. And they've used that extra manpower. Essentially, you in a family, let's say you used to work on average 40 hours a week at a job outside of the home, and now we're probably more like 100 hours a week for an average family of 2 parents working outside the home. And they're not making more money, they're not saving more money, they're not getting a higher percentage of the value that they create. It's the opposite, in fact, and the government is siphoning away a greater and greater percentage, and it's just being covered up by the fact that there are 2 incomes. And so I think moving back to a form of money that allows us, again, to keep that value that we're creating with our time, and doesn't allow for as much value to be siphoned away by the time thieves, it will at least stop disincentivizing the traditional family unit, which is what's going on right now. I don't think that model needs any additional incentives. I think it will be its own incentives if people can afford to live on a single family or single income family. I think that will become a lot more common. And in the world that we have today, where we have a lot more gender equality, a lot more opportunities for women than there were 50, 70 years ago, I don't see why we couldn't be in a world where either a woman or a man could sustain a family quite comfortably on an average single income.
Yeah, it's like it just crept in through the guise of an empowered movement. And it's interesting because I had a lot of women clients over the years that would say, help me want to have sex with my husband after being married for quite some time. But it actually often came back to, almost 100% of the time, came back to the fact that they had actually were never really attracted to their husband from the get-go, and they chose that marriage from a security standpoint. And I looked back at that thinking about how many people, and even in myself, just how tempted I'd been over the years to do that because of the fact that we haven't really been aware of how much that crept in, even in the subconscious, where people are sometimes just choosing that security, but they're not choosing that security with just one person that can fund the family. They're going, okay, but there's the 2 of us together, then we can somehow have a bit of a better lifestyle, like a bit of a higher bracket. And I think sometimes that's the comfort of Canadians too, where they're now in those 2 income houses, and they do live a little bit better than, say, someone on a 1 income household, but that's also kept them like just comfortable enough to not question.
Yeah, and I think we're getting to a point where fewer and fewer people are actually comfortable enough. There's Canada is the country living on consumer debt, and there are a lot more people than 5 years ago who are not comfortable. They're maintaining those 2 incomes to stay afloat, and they're barely doing it, if at all. And living on debt and living beyond their means, and really pursuing that high time preference, instant gratification lifestyle. I think part of the result of all of this has been that the lines of gender roles have been blurred quite significantly, and so you've seen women taking on a lot more masculine roles in a relationship and in a family, and that has, in some ways, it's left women feeling a lack of masculinity in their lives, I think, and it's left men feeling like they don't have as much purpose, they don't have as much direction, and they don't really know what to do. And I think that's something that I see a lot when I talk to, especially younger people who, are I think struggling even more in the dating pool. And when I see, or when I hear what those people have to say about dating, it generally is pretty dismal. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that the general opinion is that the men are lost and lacking direction and not really fulfilling the core of what those masculine roles are. And there's some really super simple things. I think it'll be interesting at the season see how many tips we can get out of all of the guests in terms of dating. That like we were talking the other day, and it's like, this may seem very straightforward and simple, but the idea of a man just like planning a date and taking care of the details and showing up and opening the door seems like a really low bar, but there's no that kind of direction, I think, is rare in the world these days.
Yeah, and
That comes
especially
down
in
to
like
gender roles.
younger, yeah, especially in the younger generation, I think what you're saying, because they have also been more programmed to kind of think of those masculine roles as toxic or somehow like not good. But then the women are also feeling like they're not protected. They don't have a leader. They don't have someone that they can trust. And I'm sure that this will come out in our conversation with Bitcoiners too, more about this way of like, the roles don't necessarily have to be so structured, but if like the woman is just having to constantly be in her masculine, then there's just no way that she can show up and provide for the man what he actually needs in the home to be the leader and to be the man that he came here to be, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's easy for this kind of discussion to be misunderstood also in terms of like, I wouldn't say that like women belong in the kitchen kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't mean gender roles need to be as rigid as that, but there are some things that we kind of innately know to be true about what we feel about masculinity and femininity. And I think it's when we get away from our instincts on those things that the sort of plot gets lost. And at the end of the day, that all kind of comes down to the incentive systems, right? And it's gotten to a point where, like you mentioned, the incentive systems for women used to be that they pretty much needed a man to survive for their resources, right? And that's not really the case anymore, right? There's an increasing movement into higher and higher paying white collar jobs, especially, most of the new lawyers that are coming out these days are women. And so I think there's sort of like a balance of power that kind of shifted and has moved into this sort of weird niche where, for the most part, the women in the sort of market of dating have the vast majority of the power. And you have this large group of sort of lost young men that can't really crack the code and don't know, how to take those masculine roles to be able to fit in with those roles that the women, I think, are actually wanting. And it's funny because it's not really like a lot of those women are not actually asking for that when you actually listen to them, especially, there's obviously a lot more women that lean left than the men. And you find this archetype in the liberal left women out there where they want both versions of a man at the same time. They want the liberal that will kind of do whatever they say and uh, you know kind of be a pushover, and then they want the more conservative man who's a bit more masculine and will take charge. And um, they like the women seem to want both of those things at the same time,
Yeah.
and that I think is another one of those ways that this whole really the expansion of the leftist ideology across North America has kind of crept in and poisoned some brains a little bit, whereas the desire to seek a masculine figure is probably the part that they can't erase. It's just naturally wired into their brains.
Well, they're gonna be attracted to that, like, innately, like you said, it's more about coming back to our instincts and our innate wisdom than it is, like, deciding this is the man's role, this is the woman's role, or this is masculinity and this is femininity. And, of course, in the spiritual conversation, like, in my world, everyone has masculine and feminine in them, like, we are, yin and yang. It's just that when there is, like, an imbalance, especially in a relationship, but then, like you said, if, people have taken on this type of thinking like, "Oh, a man should be like this if he's, uh, aware of the political correctness of things," so to speak. And, when I think about that, I think about how, yeah, it is time for men to let their consciousness raise on a lot of levels in terms of, like, just evolving into, like, coming from that position of masculinity, but not in a way that, they're having to either cater to some type of ideology or, like, numb themselves out with, like, a bunch of fiat things too. Like, there is, like, a call. I do think that there is a call for men to, like, really come into their power, but not from an old, outdated modality either that was in the past that was just kind of the authoritative. And I know that we've talked about this before, and I've talked about this on season 1 too, where I really believe that we're coming out of the age of external authority. And I think if men can also come into their authority and show up in that way, that's like the new masculinity.
Yeah, I think the age of woke is on its way out. And people are sick of that, and that includes what it's done to masculinity and femininity. I think
Yeah.
the worry of being branded as toxic masculinity is a lot less than it was a few years ago,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
there is more room in our culture for men to be masculine, which is great.
Well, and women are attracted to that. Just they just are. Like you said, they might in their head think they want a man like this, or, we want this, but then innately, like those women coming to me saying, like, make me want to have sex with my husband again, are basically also realizing how they, like, kind of took away their attraction to them by making them kind of do whatever they want. Like, they sort of turn the man into a yes man, and then they're not attracted to them anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So, so
Eh,
where do you think men are failing in the dating world right now?
ooh, I I think well, I don't really think that they're failing, to be honest. I think that they I mean, I think this is probably different at different age groups, but I think, 1, they're just kind of afraid to be themselves because they are afraid to kind of cross a line or, step on a toe or maybe even be called out for something. I think there is, like, a fear of public scrutiny. So maybe they submit to that too much and they don't have enough trust in themselves. Um, and I also think that some men are failing because they have ceased to be the leaders even in the community, not just in the family. Like where they're standing up for our rights or they're standing up to say, no, this isn't good. And we saw that in COVID too. Like And we constantly see that. Like a lot, like I know women that'll say, "Oh, let's get the moms together and make change here." But like really what we need is to be able to have the men stand up so we can like still do things that create like a better community or a better world. But does that make sense? Like in this term of like, I don't know.
It does. I think there's also so I think more and more people have identified that, but there's also this kind of overswing back in the other direction going on at the same time, where you have kind of like the Andrew Tate like self help pickup artist kind of
Yeah.
genre, and you get this like I saw a little short from Andrew Tate the other day that was like, um, you know you if you're having trouble getting women, just like get in the gym and get rich, and then the women will come to you basically. And he's like, they will beg you. And I think that goes too far. There's this kind of like we've talked about it before, where we call it like the hustle culture, where
Mhm.
the idea that all you need to do is work and hit the gym and not actually put any effort into seeking the kind of relationship that you might want in your life.
Mhm.
And I think that is like a, an overcorrection in the other direction. And I think there is like a natural balance there where, um, I think that sort of forced hyper masculinity and the sort of phony alpha persona is very much not the natural inclination of masculinity. And it
Yeah.
doesn't come across as such. It comes across as like for most people, like a very desperate attempt that in some ways masks the fact that they're still just as lost.
It's rooted in insecurity. And, this is actually going to be a topic I am sure that will come up over the season of this sort of like head down focus of just hustle, 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 build, build, build without sort of, looking, having the step back and like looking at what you're intending, what you're creating. But then also, in that same way that we know that fiat and the past has caused a lot of wounds. And a lot of people found Bitcoin, including myself, from like a realization that like no matter how hard I hustle or how hard I try, I'm trying to grow and build in a broken system. And there is a certain amount of like traumatization from that, especially when you start to heal from it. And I do believe like Bitcoin helps us heal from that and like really gives us hope for the future. And I can see that with dating as well, where past experiences that people have had and, ways that they were in situationships or relationships or even marriages that weren't really aligned with values or even visions for what they're creating together in the partnership. And I think it has, overall caused people to kind of not have hope or even desire for something in the future. And I think that that's kind of staying stuck in like fiat relationships to not have hope and to not actually understand that we can let go and we can heal from that with the hope and the knowing that more and more people are waking up to these things. More and more people are really interested in having high value aligned relationships. And what that looks like is different for everyone, of course.
Yeah, and I think just the general sense of hope that Bitcoin brings to people, you can see like there's a very common problem out there, again, especially with young people, where it's like maybe they do find a good partner and they're happily married or together with somebody, but the state of the world, especially if you're younger, makes it pretty hard to afford anything. And so, you got a two-person income or a two-income household. A lot of the time, especially if you're living in a major city, that still doesn't mean that you can even afford a house.
Yeah.
It might just mean that you've got a small apartment, and those people are kind of stuck, um, waiting to be able to afford to start a family.
Mhm.
And just even being in the Bitcoin space for a few years can change that quite drastically. And so I think it's kind of opening the door to people having more options in terms of the kind of life they want to have. And I think, and you see this a little bit on Twitter and whatnot, is that you're getting more people who are being more deliberate about looking for what they are after.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'd be curious to get your input, like as a Bitcoiner, and one of the few women in the space who is dating in the space. Like I've heard you say before that, like, somebody told you, like, you must have a lot of options. Is it are there a lot of great options out there as women trying to date Bitcoiners?
I wouldn't know really because they're all anonymous, probably the great options. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, being told like, well, you have like so many options, like is just as if like amount of numbers equals like quality. I would say that in general, like the more that I date in the fiat world, the more my mind keeps going back to like, I think I probably just need a Bitcoiner because it's just becoming like more and more of a disconnect. And not because they're not like a Bitcoiner. I mean, I found that even before just with like, say, my understanding of like mindset and like living happily, that there would sometimes be a disconnect. But now there's even more so because it seems like there's um again like a kind of a lack of like hope, or there's still like a real desire to grow something like a fiat success, like I've got this money or this car, or I can provide this for you. And like, well, uh, financial security is definitely a plus in terms of attracting or being with like a partner. When it comes from a fiat perspective, it's kind of, it's a little bit yucky and it's like kind of unattractive. And I know like from speaking to other Bitcoin men that are single, they find that too. Like one went to like a dating a dinner and he was just like, wow, I forgot what it's like to like just talk to normies. But what I find and maybe I haven't been in the Bitcoin space, long enough. It's only been a couple of years, and I'm not really the type that I'm like seeking someone. Like I'm observing, I'm feeling, I'm seeing. I mean, I get, messages in my DMs, but what I find is that it's kind of hard to meet a Bitcoiner, and also, thinking in terms of long term, like really wanting like a relationship like that lasts, like a sustainable relationship. It's also very different too because Bitcoin is like a sacred space. So I'm not trying to just like date a bunch of Bitcoiners and then have my space be all muddled with that energy. So
Yeah,
I
that makes sense.
yeah.
It's an interesting phenomenon because as a man looking to date women in the Bitcoin space is like, the opposite is true with the numbers game, obviously, right? Where it's like a lot of numbers doesn't mean good options, but very few numbers means very few numbers. So, but I feel like it's less of less of an uphill battle for a man who's a Bitcoiner to date a woman who's a non-Bitcoiner,
Hmm.
and the opposite. There's kind of this sort of view that the man should be knowledgeable in financial areas, and there are a lot of fiat brained finance pros out there that don't really know what the world is like at all, but they know what their little corner of it is like and how to squeeze dollars out of that corner, and that translates into a big disconnect, I think, when they run into a woman who is knowledgeable about what money is and what Bitcoin is and what the actual state of the world is as a result of the corruption of our money. It kind of challenges everything that they do, and there's a gap there. That's a gap that keeps them from getting into the Bitcoin industry as well.
Yeah, that's actually funny. I just had that thought. Like, it's actually probably easier to date a non-Bitcoiner woman and turn her into a Bitcoiner than it is as a man to like be a non-Bitcoiner and date a Bitcoiner woman and just be like, oh my God, you're challenging everything I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the side effects of Bitcoin is it does challenge everything you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder though, just as I start to meet more women in Bitcoin, as people like have been connecting me, especially over X with more women in Bitcoin, and how like there's actually more than we think and more than we know, but they're just sort of more under they're just behind the scenes or they're just learning. And sometimes they do feel intimidated by the men in Bitcoin because the men are just so confident and they're so sure and they're so like bold. And so I think sometimes there's actually more of us than appears, maybe especially in the online space. And then even here, since I've been going to, meetups for at least over the last year on a consistent basis, the more I go, the more women come. And because I know women that went before I ever went and said, like, they went and there's no women and they never went back, and the type of men that were there. I never found that at all. I found the men that are there awesome. They're welcoming. They're always interested in learn and teaching us, us, like anyone, not just women, just anyone. So maybe the space is also changing more too. You would be better to speak to this than me.
Yeah, I mean it's changing, but it's slow. Like I think like we opened our Bitcoin store, physical store in 2013, and we were talking about it, my business partner in that store and I a while ago, and I think we literally had one woman come into our store. Like we can only think of one time that a woman came into the store, and it was literally all like pretty much the same kind of guys back then. It was like conspiracy theory, like deep rabbit hole, anti-government people, and basement nerds, and that was about it. So it's moved. There's like my wild guess is that we're probably at like 10 to 20% women in the Bitcoin space right now.
Okay.
You know, it kind of makes sense. Like men are more risk takers, and
Mhm.
there's also like a very large reason that the people get into Bitcoin is the number go up technology, obviously, and you show up and you see this as a potential way to buy some Bitcoin, potentially sell it for more dollars later, and then next thing you know, you're hooked and you're ready to tear down the government.
Write a book, do a podcast.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good point. I mean, Mateo from Orange Pill app told me that there's 97% men and 3% women. And I was shocked because we have a pretty big group of women on there, like 300, almost 300 women. So I was like, oh, that's like all the women on the app in this women's group. So I think you're right in terms of that. And, I don't want to say this in a way that makes it sound like women can't be like math or like finance people, because I know obviously they can, but I know for myself, maybe, I mean, I'm born in the 70s, so I really didn't have like any financial kind of education, or even like wasn't even kind of pushed in the direction to. I mean, I was still in the era of like find a man who can take care of you, like we're talking about, and wasn't able to do that. Had a very rebellious growing up, but it never ever got into money until even when I had my own business, I had no knowledge of that stuff. And it really wasn't until my business like really boomed and then I was forced to learn it because I was just getting cooked by taxes. And it's interesting because I do still find that, like, I know for me, I would have been doing way more with Bitcoin from like when I first learned about it if I didn't feel so intimidated by the tech, which now to me sounds like silly because it's so easy. But at the same time, like I did try to set up my BitX and like it didn't work. And I was like, damn, why can't I just have like a Bitcoiner boyfriend? Like I still have this thought in my head because now I've got to like go seek out someone to help me fix my VidX. And like, I have a ton of people, we know that will help me, but it still kind of reinforces that in me where I'm like, I really just wish that I did have a man to like take care of those things. No lie.
Well, have you seen the phenomenon in the traditional dating world where women will go on to like Tinder or some dating app when they need like, oh, I need somebody to hang my TV, or you know what I mean? So they go on a date, get this guy to hang the TV. So maybe that's the solution on Orange Pill app is.
It really is. I mean, honestly, like there's so many things. Like if someone would just be like, I'll set up your cold storage, Jade, I'd be like, yes. And again, like I know that there's definitely, especially the women we know in Bitcoin, are doing those things on their own. And yeah, that's super empowering. And like honestly, like that's great. It's just that's why I think that is one of the reasons why I think there are less women in Bitcoin. Or like I know for me that when I met a lot at different conferences, sometimes they're there because like their man got them into it, or they are not even that into it. They're just there with their man. And then there's of course women, like Emma that we've had on the podcast, and Val, that really have learned to use Bitcoin to empower women and to empower health. And like there is that which growing, which is I think the part of Bitcoin that really interests women. That's like a part that really interests us, like the philanthropic and like the, ways that we can use Bitcoin to make the world a better place. And
Yeah.
the astrology and the spirituality and like that fun stuff that we like.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we're just getting to a point where, um, like what you were saying there, I can set up your hardware wallet. Like we might see that in the near future on dating apps. People being, I can set up your hardware wallet now. If you were to put Bitcoin on there, they might assume you're rich, I guess. But
That's pretty common.
there's also, I hadn't been on the dating app for a little while, but the thing I remember seeing is women having things that just say like no crypto in their profiles because there's two
Yeah.
groups. There's scammers on there that are trying to pull some kind of romance scam or a check cashing scam or something like that. And then there's just like moron crypto bros that nobody wants to hear from.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of like you mentioned astrology, but I don't think it would be a very good move for a woman to put all of her like her chart, her astrology on her dating profile. So,
Well, there's more and more men that are doing that, which is very interesting. Because I mean, if men are smart, they would put theirs on there, because
yeah.
like,
Well, the logic of that is like, a woman putting Bitcoin on her dating profile.
well, let me tell you. So, I mean, this is kind of how we got here because I made that post with that AI girl saying Bitcoiners only and said, should I make this my dating profile? And it went so viral. And then we started to see just how relevant this conversation is in Bitcoin. But I think at that point, like I was on dating apps and I did put that, and I just put like some things I love, like, I don't know, the beach and Bitcoin and I don't know, dance hall or something. Like, and it was really interesting because like the majority, it was like honestly, if I would have just kept doing it, it's just me educating guys about Bitcoin. Like, I mean, it just became like, yeah, they like they think that you're rich or like you're, like the odd person was like, okay in terms of like, oh, that's cool. But it was mostly like guys that were like, I can't afford that. It's so high right now. I'm like, you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin, right? That's kind of how it went. But actually how I started thinking about it was kind of like if people would put like vaccinated or not vaccinated on their profile, because that's like a weird thing that started since COVID. And I found like sometimes they would say not vaccinated. So I'd be like, oh, bet, and then I would see how they're like pure bloods only, or, then they just are like so extreme in it that I could see that being like crypto and Bitcoin too.
Yeah, I mean, I never tried. There's a dating app for the unvaccinated.
Oh, there is one.
Yeah, and I
And
never tried it, but I bet you there's a lot more Bitcoiners on that app.
I tried it, but there wasn't anyone in our area. I mean, I'm a research person, so I'll try anything. And it was honestly, it was it's not it. I don't know. I think actually Bitcoiners are not generally on dating apps,
Yeah,
because
that's
that's
probably
how
true.
I found about myself, right? Like I'm not, it's just I like life or God or spirit to like just bring me the people that are meant in my life. And I think that that's like really always helped me like connect with the right people, learn, grow in friendships as well. But then sometimes when you want to be more intentional, like you said, you don't just want to go to the gym and like get yourself right. And it's like when you want to be more intentional, that's where it gets difficult. And that's why on X, people always suggest Orange Pill app to find Bitcoiners, but that's because that's not like a place where people are intentionally going to date. Plus, I'm guessing most of the really great Bitcoiners are anon and or in relationships. Like a lot of people, even on that app, will say father, husband, it for this exact reason. But again, it's not like a place where you can intentionally go to find a Bitcoiner to date.
Yeah, eventually somebody's going to make a Bitcoiner dating app, and it's not going to work very well because there'll be no women on there. But maybe if the demographics keep changing at some point, that'll be possible.
Well, and then we found that with that post on X too, right? How then if a woman wants to date a Bitcoiner, now she's like a gold digger, or she's like her motives are being questioned. So then they kind of push women away too.
Yeah, it's interesting because that sort of desire for women to date a man with resources is something that was just like openly accepted through most of human history,
Yeah.
and then now it's viewed as the negative.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is that whole twisting of the incentives has moved the it's moved a woman's incentives. Really, it's the incentives have been funded by the money printing to undermine, like we discussed, the family and everything else. And yeah, the incentive is not there in the same way that it used to be, for a woman to pursue that kind of relationship. And when presented with the very direct incentive, which still exists, and obviously people are still interested in dating somebody who's financially stable, um, that incentive is kind of like vilified
Yeah.
nowadays. Even though it's like, as much as you want to vilify it, it's still there. It doesn't change the fact that you know rich men get lots of women. It's going to be the case forever.
Yeah, because there's a certain relaxation that a woman can have in that. Like for me, I love, creating. I have used my creative ability to create businesses and to do passion projects like this. But ultimately, I'm a great cook. Like, I'm a great mother. Like, I love being in that role. And if I could afford to be in that role more, I wouldn't have to like use my creativity for income. I could use my creativity to like grow people and like a unit, a family unit. And so I think that that's also part of that desire, because it's like you said, the rules don't have to be like that. But if we're having to use our abilities to survive, then we have less time to just relax and care for and love those around us, which I just do think is the natural role of a woman, to like nurture and love and support.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of naturally trends in that direction when our instincts are allowed to be pursued.
Yeah. Yeah. And desires. desires are important, are much more important than people think, because we're not talking desires for quick dopamine. We're talking like desires for like something, like there's like that conversation around depression and how, yeah, like you're gonna feel depressed if you're not creating in life and you don't feel like you have power to create the life that you want. So
Yeah.
maybe Bitcoin can cure depression too.
Yeah, I mean it has been a lifeline to a lot of people for sure. And
Definitely.
like if Bitcoin didn't exist, we'd be fucked. Like the whole world would be screwed right now if we didn't have a way to get out from under the boots of the money printers. We would
Mhm.
not have a good outlook for the future, and luckily we do have Bitcoin. So
Yeah, and I do wanna say, as we finish up, is like I did find a lot of great men Bitcoiners like really resonating with this. Like, yeah, of course we would want a woman aligned, or of course a woman would want like a man aligned, because it's not just the financial security of it all. It's also like the values and like the being able to see the fiat disasters that we live in with yet still like a hope for the future. That's really attractive.
yeah, exactly. Bitcoin kind of naturally leads itself to the same worldview, which is that the government's power needs to be abated.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I'm super excited for this season. We already have like a great list of guests lined up.
Yeah, it should be good. I'm interested to see what everybody has to say. It's definitely it's a topic that I don't think has been explored enough yet. There's obviously some interest.
Same. And we've got everything from single to married and everything in between. So it'll be great to hear the experience of Bitcoiners and dating and marriage, and especially in the current, climate of the world.
Yeah, should be great. I look forward to the rest of the season.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on for episode 1 as we get the season kicked off.
Thanks for having me.
Ciao.